Well, last year, the Bible Society released a report titled The Quiet Revival, and it's about church attendance in England. And this report found that in 2018, just 4% of young men attended church regularly. In 2024, that number had jumped to 21%. Right? 21% of 18 to 25-year-olds now attend church regularly in England. Now, social commentators claim this has come through a variety of reasons, no doubt. Life is complicated. But the two that keep coming up show us that young men are looking for meaning and identity in life. So with meaning, Gen Z has realised that neo-atheism, which was popular among Gen X and Gen Y, neo-atheism is completely vacuous when it comes to meaning. The reason being is that if we are nothing more than a big cosmic accident, then there is no meaning to life. So they're reacting against atheism. Then with regards to identity, young men have been told by Western society in recent years that the word masculinity is now almost inseparable from the word toxic. So these young men are reacting against secularism as well, who can tell them what they're not to be, but they haven't come up with an idea of what they are to be. But here's the thing, it's not just the Christian church that is growing. Islam has seen significant growth in England as well. One of the more famous converts to Islam in England is the online influencer Andrew Tate, who said he converted to Islam in 2022 because Islam gives him the meaning and identity he's looking for, and he is now passing that on his online with his online presence. Now, the reason I mention this is because the passage that was just read for us looks at a similar clash of faiths when the prophet Elijah is sent outside the land of Israel. And the purpose of his mission is to ask which God is the one true God. And here's the thing. This is the number one question all humans need to answer. Right? To live a truly examined life, the job of every adult human is to figure out which God is the true God. Now, atheists will come back at me and say, well, hang on a minute. I don't have faith in any God, so why do I have to choose a God? Well, my answer to that is you've got even bigger fish to fry. The reason being, you cannot prove that God doesn't exist. And so to make the claim there is no God is a faith claim. But the problem with that faith claim is that the evidence suggests otherwise. There's a book that's just been released, I think in the last 12 months or so. It's by a scientist by the name of Stephen Meyer, and it's called Return of the God Hypothesis. And what this scientist does, he's been studying at Cambridge the last couple of years, he shows that many of the scientific findings over the last 30 years demand intelligent design. So I'll give you just one example. This is to do with the Big Bang. This is what he says in his book. He says, if we were to hit the rewind button on the universe, like the universe is currently expanding, we would see the universe contract back in on itself all the way back to what scientists call a singularity. And a singularity is a state of zero space. Now, do you know how much matter you can fit into zero space? It's zero. And what this means is, according to the Big Bang Theory, the origins of the universe sound eerily like Genesis chapter 1, where God created ex nihilo, out of nothing. So if we are to lead the truly examined life, and that is as opposed to sort of a willfully ignorant life, if you want to live a willfully ignorant life, go for it. But if you want to live the examined life, the job of every human adult is to figure out which of the world religions, and remember, they all say opposing things, so they can't all be right, all right? Which of the world religions presents us with the one true God? But this is a difficult task because there's so much information out there these days. Well, our passage today presents us with someone who is wrestling with this very question. But the advantage that this woman has is she is sent someone who is very spiritually discerning. And the prophet Elijah shows this widow three things, which is very handy for my sermon outline, three things about the God of the Bible that suggests very strongly that he is the one true God. And these three things are that the God of the Bible is the inclusive God, he is the living God, and he is the resurrecting God. There are our 3 points for today. And so whether you're still a seeker, right, still thinking through all this in terms of which God might be the real God, or whether you're at the complete other end of the spectrum and you wish to help others think this through, right? And that's the goal of all Christians, to get to the maturity that we can actually help others think this through. Wherever you are on this spectrum, I pray that you can stick with me as we look at the question that every human adult has to deal with. Which is the one true God. So we pick up the narrative several chapters after last week. Brief recap. So 1 Kings 1 to 11 is about Solomon. And then after Solomon, we get the very disastrous kingships of both Rehoboam, he's the rightful heir, and Jeroboam, who was the first king of the northern tribe of Israel, the northern kingdom of Israel. And 1 Kings 14 to 16 we've skipped over, but those chapters basically look at Rehoboam and Jeroboam's successors, and they don't fare much better than Rehoboam and Jeroboam did. But at the end of 1 Kings 16, just before our passage, we're introduced to the worst king in all of Israel's history. This is King Ahab, and this is what the author says. So if you've got your Bibles open there, 1 Kings 16 verse 30, it says, Ahab, son of Omri, did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. Now, part of the reason for this is that Ahab marries a woman called Jezebel, and she was the daughter of the king of Sidon. And Jezebel is arguably the worst woman in the whole Bible. It's kind of like why Ahab and Jezebel, they're not big on the baby name lists these days. You don't come across many baby Jezebels or baby Ahabs. It's because they're terrible, terrible people. And Ahab, what he does is not the babies, the people in the Bible, Ahab lets Jezebel basically promote Baal worship in Israel. And in 1 Kings 17, God responds. He says this, Now Elijah the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word. Now, why does Elijah call for a drought? It's because Baal is the storm god, right? He is the pagan god that brought the rains. And so what Elijah is doing here is he's setting up a challenge. He's asking, who is the one true God? Is it Baal, who is supposed to bring you the rain, or is it Yahweh, who has just declared there will be no rain for the foreseeable future? Well, no rain means a famine ensues quite quickly, and Elijah is initially protected from this famine because God sends him to the Kerith ravine where there's a bit of water and ravens miraculously bring him bread and wine each day. But the Kerith ravine soon dries up and God sends Elijah to a town called Zarephath, which is in Sidon. Now, why is this important? It's because Sidon is where Jezebel comes from. And so God is taking this fight between Baal and himself right into Baal territory. And in doing so, God is showing us something very important about himself. And that is that he is an inclusive God. Now, one of the charges often brought against Christianity is it's too exclusive. People will say, well, why is there only one way to heaven? Through Jesus. I mean, that's very exclusive. Well, what we see here is that this one way makes the God of the Bible the most inclusive God on the planet. Let me explain. So to begin with, God is sending his prophet to a Gentile. That's a non-Jew. And this is actually a huge problem for Jews back in biblical times. When Jesus preached his very first sermon, this is in Luke chapter 4, he actually mentions this passage in his first sermon. Let me read to you. This is just 2 verses. Luke 4:25 and 26. Jesus says to his audience, he says, I assure you that there were many widows in Israel in Elijah's time, where the sky was shut for 3.5 years and there was a severe famine throughout the land. Yet Elijah was not sent to any one of them, but to a widow in Zarephath in the region of Sidon. And as soon as Jesus actually says this, we're told the people in the synagogue became so furious that they wanted to kill Jesus then and there. They didn't like the fact that God invites people from all races. But not only was this woman a Gentile, she was a pagan. Right? She lived smack bang in the middle of Baal territory. And so God invites people from all religions as well as all races. Furthermore, she's a woman. I don't know if the women here are aware of this or not, but there is an inbuilt need in men to be able to provide for ourselves and our family. And yet here is God telling Elijah, you're going to be provided for by a woman. Right? You can probably just think of the thought process. Elijah's going, look, can't we just keep the ravens coming? I'd rather be provided by a raven than have to, have a woman look after me. But that's what he does. God just blows right past the gender barrier here as well. And fourthly, this woman was poor. There's often a view among middle-class people or upper-class people. They tend to look down on the poor and think the only reason you're poor is because you're lazy. Not so God. He honours this poor woman by sending his prophet to her. And in sending Elijah to be cared for by this poor, pagan, Gentile woman, God is showing that he is inclusive. And the reason Christianity is the most inclusive religion on the planet is because salvation is not based on merit. It's based on grace. All right? If you ask a Muslim, how do you get to eternal paradise? They will say it has to do with merit, with doing the right things. If you speak to a Hindu about their faith, they'll talk about how it's based on a caste system. You need to be in the right caste. I don't know about the current Pope, but I know the previous Pope said that everyone gets to heaven in the end. It's just that the Roman Catholics go first class. Right? All world religions are exclusive in some way. Right? If you haven't performed enough good deeds, if you're from the wrong caste system, or if you don't know the right religious deeds to perform, then you're out. Now, I'm not saying the God of the Bible isn't exclusive in his own way. There's still something you need to do to get in. But the reason he is more inclusive than any other world religion is because salvation is not of merit. It's of grace. It's a free gift. Right? Notice the widow in Zarephath, she has done nothing to earn being saved from the famine. In fact, she actually admits in verse 18 that she's sinful. But all she has to do was accept God's grace. Right? Accept that she needs God's help. And so our first bit of application for today is never consider anyone beyond salvation. Right? God sent his prophet deep into enemy territory to find a poor, pagan, Gentile woman. Why? Because God accepts anyone who is willing to humble themselves before him. So, the God of the Bible is more inclusive than any other God. Elijah then presents us with a second piece of evidence that his God is the one true God, and that is that the God of the Bible is the living God. Right? So he calls God the living God in verse 1, and then the woman herself repeats it in verse 12. All right? When Elijah asks her for some food, we read, where is it? Verse 12, as surely as the Lord your God lives, she replied, I don't have any bread. Now, what does it mean that God is living? Well, again, it's part of this challenge between God and Baal. A living God means that he's not a statue. There's this very comical episode in 1 Samuel 5 where the Philistines capture the ark of God and place it in the temple of their god, Dagon, to show that, their God reigns supreme. But the morning after, right, the very morning after they place the ark of God in Dagon's temple, the Philistines wake up to find that their idol had mysteriously tipped over. Right? Dagon had fallen prostrate before the ark of God. Now, what do you do when your idol falls off or falls over? Well, you pick your God back up and you put your God back where he goes. And that's what they did, only to find the exact same thing happen the next morning. Why do you have to pick your God up and put it back in its place? It's because it's not a real God. Right? These statues, these idols, are figments of your imagination. But this poses the question, well, how do you know if your God is a real God or if it's a figment of your imagination? How can you tell if your God is living or dead? And the answer is, a living God will sometimes do things we don't understand or don't agree with. Right? Think it through with me. If you've made your own God up in your mind, then that God will never do things you don't understand or don't like. The reason being that you wouldn't believe in a God like that. Right? If we've designed our God in our own mind, he's going to believe exactly what we believe, and he's going to behave in the exact same way we think he should behave. And that's how this passage starts out. Yahweh gives this widow a never-ending pack of Tim Tams, basically. All right? Her jar of flour never runs out. Her jug of oil never runs out. But God then does something we don't expect. He allows this woman's child to get ill and die in verse 17. Now, here's the thing. The death of a child is tragic at any age. No parent should outlive their child. But what's even more tragic in this case is that this child is probably under the age of 10, because the woman and Elijah can still carry them around. It is a small child. The God of the Bible sometimes does things we don't understand or don't like. Now, the question is, how do we deal with that? Well, notice how both the woman and Elijah respond. Neither of them just stop believing in Yahweh. Right? If you've got a God you've projected in your mind and he does something you don't like or don't understand, you just stop believing in him. Not so here. This is a real God. This is a living God. But they are both confused. Now, the woman, remember, she's grown up in pagan territory. She's probably heard of Yahweh, but doesn't know much about him. And so a lot of what she thinks about Yahweh is probably heavily influenced by her pagan religion, which was based on merit. Right? This is what she says, why she says in verse 18, over the page, she says, what do you have against me, man of God? Did you come here to remind me of my sin and kill my son? Right? She's thinking she's being punished for her sin. That's a merit-based religion. But here's the thing. Elijah doesn't have any answers either. Now, Elijah's the guy with the doctorate in seminary. Like, he knows his stuff compared to the woman. But he doesn't have any answers. He says in verse 20, he cries out, Lord my God, why have you brought tragedy even on this widow I'm staying with by causing her son to die? All right, God has done something that neither of them understand and neither of them like. And that's because the God of the Bible is not some pathetic little domesticated God that just snaps to our beg and call. The living God is beyond our understanding, and he's also beyond our control. And this is the thing. If we are not willing to have a God who sometimes does things we don't understand or sometimes tells us things we don't like, then you will never have a living God. You will only have a figment of your imagination. So application point number 2 for today is make sure you are letting your God challenge you, confuse you, and call you out at times. Because if your God happens to agree with everything you believe, then you don't have a living God. You've got one you've made up. So, we have an inclusive God. We've got a living God. Third and final thing we learn in this passage is what comes through what God does next, and that is he performs what I believe is the first resurrection in recorded history. I might be mistaken, but I think this is the first resurrection in the Bible. And the question we actually need to ask is why? Like, why did God bring this child back from the dead? There's plenty of other children who have died at a young age, like King David, when he committed adultery with Bathsheba. That child got sick, and even though David pleaded, the child ended up dying. So why save this one? Well, I think there are two reasons God saves this child. And the first is to show God's grace again. See, notice that neither the woman nor Elijah claimed that God had no right to take the boy. They're not crying out for justice here, right? King David didn't cry out for justice for his child. He begged God to save his child, but not because of justice. He knew he'd sinned. Just like this woman knows that she's sinful. So she's not crying out, it's not fair. She's simply asking, is it because of my sin? What do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son? God brings her back to tell her, no, your son is not dying for your sin. In fact, he can't. Only my son can do that. About 900 years after this episode, God's son paid for this woman's sins, along with yours and along with mine. See, the God of the Bible is not merit-based. He is grace-based. And he offers salvation to us free of charge. But the reason it's free of charge to us is because he paid the ransom himself. And here's the thing, friends. Even if you don't believe in a God like that, don't you secretly wish he were true? Don't you secretly wish that out of all the gods of all the religions of the world, there was one out there who loved his creatures so much that he was willing to pay for their sin himself? So that's the first reason God resurrects this child, is to show once again he is not a God of merit like Baal or the other made-up gods. He is a God of grace. Second reason he brings this child back from the dead is to show again that he is the one true God. All right, read the last verse with me. Then the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth." All right, bringing someone back from the dead is about the greatest miracle you can perform. Like imagine if Elijah was like a traveling magician. How do you top that? You know, pull a rabbit out of your hat? That doesn't top it. You cannot get any more convincing evidence than bringing someone back from the dead. And the woman puts her faith solidly, firmly in Yahweh. But here's our problem. We weren't there. We didn't see it. We didn't witness it. And so how do we know this is not just some fairy tale that's been made up? Well, the good news for you and I is that God did it again, some 900 years later with Jesus. And when he brought back Jesus from the dead, he gave us 4 pieces of evidence to prove the resurrection really took place on that very first Easter Sunday. And here's the thing. All you have to do to prove Christianity is false is to prove that one of these 4 things didn't happen. It's really simple, right? If you are a seeker and you're looking to rule out Christianity, I'm doing all the heavy lifting for you. I'm going to give you 4 bits of evidence. And if you can plug a hole in any one of these 4 bits of evidence, then you don't have to believe in Christianity. You can rule that one out as the one true God, right? But what are these 4 pieces of evidence? I get them from Dr. William Lane Craig. Fact number 1, There are multiple independent crucifixion accounts that claim Jesus was buried in the tomb owned by Joseph of Arimathea, with no competing stories. Now, we have the Gospels. We also have a whole bunch of other writings from the first century that are extra biblical, that are not in the Bible, that talk about Jesus' death, right? None of them give us another story other than that Jesus was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. And so what this means is the location of Jesus' tomb was well known. Fact number 2, there are multiple independent sources who claim Jesus' tomb was empty on Easter Sunday. The fact is, the apostles could not have founded a movement based on an empty tomb if the location of the tomb was so well known. The fact that the Jews spread an alternate theory that the body had been stolen, as Matthew's gospel outlines, shows even the Jewish leaders knew the tomb was empty. Fact number 3, numerous individuals on multiple occasions experienced appearances of the risen Jesus. The Apostle Paul lists all of them in 1 Corinthians 15, leaving it open for the reader to refute it. All you needed to do was go and ask them. And some of those eyewitnesses were Jesus' own brothers, who were still alive at the time of writing 1 Corinthians. Right? Now, what would it take for Jesus' own brothers to believe he was risen from the dead? Fact number 4. While the disciples had no reason to believe Jesus was risen, they all went to an early grave proclaiming the risen Jesus. Right? Since AD 40, Christians have been the most persecuted people group in history based on Jesus' death and resurrection. And yet they still believe. And if you want a truly examined life, then that's the evidence you need to do business with. So, there are our 3 pieces of evidence from this passage to suggest that the God of the Bible is the one true God. Right? Number 1, the God of the Bible is an inclusive God based on grace, which means, well, there's hope for you and me. There's way more hope than any other world religion has. Number 2, the Christian God is a living God. He's not a figment of our imagination who does everything we want him to do. Right? He is beyond our understanding and out of our control. And number 3, he is a resurrecting God. And if he's a resurrecting God, as those 4 pieces of evidence suggests, then he is the one true God who demands our allegiance. And if we're going to live the truly examined life, I pray that we can echo the words of the widow of Zarephath when she said, "Now I know that you're a man of God and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth."